Welcome. It is great to see all of you, and I'm very, very excited to welcome our teacher for this week, Rabbi Stephanie Crawley. And Rabbi Crawley is one of the rabbis at Temple Micah in Washington, D.C. And before I turn it over to her, I have to really quickly tell you my Temple Micah story because Temple Micah was one of my first synagogue jobs. I was a um, first year student at George Washington University, and I was hired before I became a Hebrew school teacher at Temple Micah. They hired me to answer the phone. So I can remember sitting in the office answering the phone, and I'm pretty sure they hired me to say, "Good afternoon, Temple Micah. This is Micah." So at any rate, now 25 years later, here we are. So I'm really excited and interested to learn with Rabbi Stephanie Crawley, who is, as I said, one of the rabbis at Temple Micah in Washington, D.C. So I'll turn things right over to her. And if we can just open, and maybe Rabbi Crawley, I'll invite you to lead us in the blessing for study as we open.
Sure. We'll immerse ourselves in our study for today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage in, and I'd add delight in words of Torah. So let's dive in to a little bit of hope. I'll just say as a way of starting an introduction that I was delighted when Rabbi Streifer emailed and asked me to do this because hope has been sort of my clarion call for the last number of years, and I sort of have described myself not only recently as a student of Judaism, but as a student of hope, and what it means for us to be sort of students of hope, and informed by a few texts. So Zechariah the prophet says that he characterizes us as prisoners of hope. And I have been really, really captivated by that idea of what it means to be a prisoner of hope, both for the good and the bad. And also that we have to be cultivators and purveyors of hope. So the text we're going to look at a little bit today is what I think hope maybe means. One of our great examples of how to act with hope, and then a few modern understandings and interpretations. So with that, I will dive in. I'm going to walk through the texts, and then we'll have some time for conversation, hopefully at the end. Sound good? Okay. Just gonna hide my, all right. So Rebecca Sloane wrote this beautiful book on hope that I think provides for us a really important distinction here. She says, hope locates itself in the premises that we don't know what will happen. And in that spaciousness of uncertainty is room to act. So what's really important here is that hope is not about knowing that something will happen. Hope is actually something that emerges out of uncertainty. And we're going to see that sort of that theme come back. When you recognize uncertainty, you recognize that you may be able to influence the outcomes, you alone or you in concert with a few dozen or several million others. Hope is an embrace of the unknown and the unknowable. The unknown and unknowable here is so important because it's not about knowing that something will work out. It's actually about embracing what you can't know and what you can never know. An alternative to the certainty of both optimists and pessimists. Optimists think it will all be fine without our involvement. Things will just work out. It'll all work out. It'll be fine. And pessimists take the opposite position. Both excuse themselves from acting. So hope, we have to understand here, hope is active. Hope requires that we cultivate it through an embrace of the unknown, and through that embrace of the unknown, we move towards action. So let's look a little bit at some of our ideas of hope. We can invite ourselves to be students of hope again this morning. So I find myself reading Noah as sort of a prophet of hope for us. And where do we make that case? Noah doesn't know how things are going to work out. So if we're looking at the embrace of the unknown, this is what God says to Noah. God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness, and because of them, I am about to destroy them with the earth. I didn't include the rest of the text here because this is where God's revealing to Noah what's going to happen ends. I'm going to destroy the earth. Go build an ark. Right? I'm going to destroy the earth, and I'm not going to tell you what happens after that. You just got to get on the boat. And he does, right? So Noah builds the ark. He gets on the ark. But there are a few things that he does that I think also teach us that even in not knowing, getting on the ark, what's going to happen, what he's going to step, if he's ever going to step onto dry land again, and what the world is going to look like, that he engages in a practice of hope. So a few verses later, we're told that he is meant to make an opening, a tzohar ta'aseh l'teva, make an opening for daylight in the ark, and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put the entrance to the ark in its side. Make it with a bottom, second, and third decks. So this is, I'll stop sharing for a second. This is a little throwaway line, 3 words in the instruction of building an ark. Right? It's supposed to have decks. It's this wide, but encoded in here is also make a window. And the rabbis, the commentators on this are like, what is this window, an opening for daylight? And you have to understand what's happening for 40 days and 40 nights? No daylight, right? It's storming for 40 days and 40 nights. So we might actually understand, make a tzohar, make a window, is open within yourself and understanding that there's going to be something beyond this storm. Because you might imagine, you look out the window, you're Noah, you look out the window, and it's all dark. And it's dark inside and dark outside. So why do you need a window? So either, one, you need a window to see when the storm stops, or the window, Zoom is doing this thing where, okay, I talk too much with my hands. So you need a window so you can see when things will work out, when the storm will stop, or the window is actually a metaphorical window inside Noah's self. Walk on the boat amidst the storm, knowing, thinking, hoping that the storm will subside. Right? And Noah actually has to build within the ark this window of hope. So that's Noah's first action of hope, I believe, is this construction of a window. Thank you, Dennis. It does when it causes Zoom to cause little things to float up. All right, so let's continue because I think Noah does one more thing that's very instructive for us. This is a more famous part of the story. We might see, okay. So at the end of 40 days, the 40 days of rain, Noah opened the window of the ark that he made. Thank God he made a window, because how else would he have known that it was time for his sort of cultivation of hope to be realized? So what does he do? He sends out the raven, and it flies around. It went to and fro until it should have dried up upon the earth. It doesn't, right? Then he sent out the dove, so the raven never comes back. Then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters had decreased from the surface of the ground. But the dove found no resting place for its foot and returned to him from the ark, for the waters were all over the earth. So he reached out and took it and brought it back to him in the ark. Right? So the first thing that happens, he opens the window. He thinks maybe the storm has stopped. He sees maybe a little bit of daylight. This is how I'm imagining it. Just a little bit of the creaking sun through the window. So he sends out the dove, he sends out the raven, doesn't work out. If you're an optimist or a pessimist, that's reason enough to close the window. I tried. I sent out the dove. I'm closing the window. I'm shutting it down forever. But what does he do instead? He waits another 7 days and sends the dove out again. We have to think what Noah was doing during those 7 days. He's waiting. He thinks the storm might be over, but he waits, which I think this is an exercise in hope for him. He's continuing to hope, and then he acts on his hope, right? He opens the window again, sends out the dove, and the dove comes back. The dove came back to him toward evening, and look, a plucked olive leaf was in its bill. And then Noah knew his hope was not naive. The waters had decreased on the earth. And still, he had to wait again because it was only a sign of hope. His hope hadn't been fully realized, but he waits another 7 days and sends out the dove, and it did not return to him again. So Noah, as our prophet of hope, does two things. He builds the window, then he opens the window, right? And that's the first thing he does. And then he waits. He waits and waits and waits, and then sends out the dove. And finally, his hope is realized. I think one of the things that we have to understand about hope is that we have to build the window right now in order that someday we'll need to open it, or we hope we can open it. And so hope is really active, right? That goes back to the Rebecca Sloaney thing. Hope has to be in action, because if we're only optimistic, then maybe we keep the window open and everything floods, or we never open the window. So let's bring it. We'll look at a text from Echa, from Lamentations, about hope and the action of hope, and then I'll share some more modern text with us. Okay. So Lamentations, which comes at the destruction of the temple and the mourning, says this: "It is good for a man when young to bear a yoke. Let him sit alone and be patient when he has laid it upon him. Let him put his mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope. Ulai yesh tikvah." So it's said in the Talmud that when, I love the, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I love this piece of text because it comes that I think it's Rabbi Yosef says in the Talmud that when he comes across this verse, excuse me, he weeps. Why? Because what the text is trying to say is it's good to suffer a little bit when you're young, and maybe there's hope. Oh, I'm so sorry. Right? Maybe there's hope. And Rabbi Yosef saying, are you kidding? Maybe there's hope. You suffer and you suffer, and maybe there's hope. And the Rashbam brings this and says this about the word ulai, about the word maybe. Whenever the word ulai occurs in the Bible, its meaning is similar to the words im or ilu, if. That what I think Rashbam is trying to tell us here is act as if there is hope. There is plenty of reason, you might think, in the destruction, in the sadness, in the devastation of the destruction of the temple, and then the rabbis looking at it, not too far removed later, that they're saying maybe there's hope. No. We have to ask Ke'ilu is if there is hope. We have to act as if there is hope. And that's how we have to walk through the world. Not as if like hope that's easy is not real hope, right? Noah builds the window not knowing what's going to happen, but he builds the window if there should be hope, right? Because hope is this active cultivation. So from there, I just want to share, I came across this record of an Indian chief in the late 19th century, after all the buffalo had gone, after his tribe, the Crow tribe, had been moved to a reservation in Montana, and he's fighting for their rights. This is his prophetic dream that he gives to his people. And I think that it is instructive for us in what philosopher Jonathan Lear calls radical hope. He says, I dreamt that our traditional way of life is coming to an end. There's nothing we can do to change that. We do not know what to hope for or what to aim for. Things are going to change in ways beyond which we can currently imagine. We certainly do know that we cannot face the future in the same way we have been doing. We must do what we can to open up our imaginations up to a radically different set of future possibilities. Right? We don't know what to hope for, what to aim for, but we still have to hope. There's more to hope for than mere biological survival. It's not enough for me to simply survive. If I'm to go on living, I need to be able to see a genuine, positive, and honorable way of going forward. We shall get the good back, though at the moment we have no more than a glimmer of what that might mean. Right? And here we see echoes of Noah, that word sohar, which can also mean glimmer or light. Right? We see the glimpse of what might be. We see the glimpse of that hope. And Jonathan Lear explains to us here, Plenty-Coups' reasoning is committed to the bare idea that something good will happen, but it does so in the recognition that one's thick understanding of the good life are about to disappear. It thereby manifests a commitment to the idea that the goodness of the world transcends one's limited and vulnerable attempt to understand it. There's no implication that one can glimpse what lies beyond the horizons of one's historically situated understanding. There is no claim to grasp ineffable truths. Indeed, this form of commitment is impressive in part because it acknowledges that no such grasp is possible. For Plenty-Coups, the question of hope was intimately bound to the question of how to live. Thus, the issue of hope becomes crucial for an ethical inquiry into life at the horizon of one's understanding. What makes this hope radical is that it is directed towards a future goodness that transcends the current ability to understand what it is. Radical hope anticipates a good for which those who have the hope as yet lack the appropriate concepts with which to understand it. Right? Noah has no idea what the world is going to look like. All he knows is that God's going to destroy the world and that there will be a new world. Right? In the same way that right now we're going through what I believe is a paradigm shift in our world, where things that we knew to be true, we no longer necessarily know them to be true. Things feel very shaky. Even concepts about what we might understand to be the good life, whether or not we feel like the good life that we have is the good life we can project going forward. And we could despair, right? All of the things are there to say, maybe we should despair, but the Jewish lesson is that we don't despair. We build windows and we cultivate hope. And what that requires actually is signing up, putting ourselves on to something that is much bigger than us, that is beyond us in this way. Right? This is the radical hope. We anticipate a good, but it's beyond us. Okay, so Charles Taylor, who is commenting on the same book, says, the hope comes from Lear's account of Crow society that human beings can find the resources to come back from a virtual dead end, to invent a new way of life in some creative continuity with the one that has been condemned, as the Crow did in embracing settled agriculture. And the hope is radical because it's virtually impossible to say beforehand what the shape of this new kind of life will be. This has to emerge in specific new forms, drawing on the particular cultural resources of each society. There's no general formula, except utterly empty formal ones like find a novel solution from within your own traditions. Is that not what Judaism is about time and time again? Ulai yesh tikvah. Maybe there is hope. If you act, if there is hope, we can build again novel solutions from within our own tradition. The notion that there could be a how-to manual for this kind of creative initiative is close to absurd. We don't know how to do it. We just know that we have to. We have to act as if we do that. And here we get to Herman Cohen, who is in writing about messianism, says this, a little instruction manual. Hope for one's own well-being is conducive to vanity. If I'm only concerned for my own success in life, it's vain. Hope for the well-being and continued existence of one's own people, though possibly conducive to the development of courage and a sacrificial spirit, easily engenders pride as well. And when one's own country experiences a prolonged period of distress, all hope seems to be vain, adding merely to one's sense of frustration and dejection. But man's, and we would expand it, of course, man's hope is transformed into faith when he no longer thinks of himself as alone. When man associates the future with the emergence of a community whose concerns will reach beyond its everyday concrete reality. Israel's faith is hope. Right? And so how do we cultivate this act of hope? When we allow ourselves to be part of something bigger. When we find these novel solutions, when we build beyond sort of the reality that we know and we embrace what we don't know. We embrace what is a sense of something more cosmic, larger, more expansive than our own lives, our own communities in this particular grounded reality. And for Herman Cohen, he says that's his understanding of the Messiah, right? That we are part of a larger story, and that larger story projected however long into eternity is what is the source of our hope. Right. And so it's about then the faith, the hope is about building the window that allows you to see that you're part of something larger. Right. In that way, each of us are sort of on our own arcs with our windows opening outward, looking at each other and deciding when and if we're going to open the window and send out the dove. So I'll stop there. Would love to hear some responses for people. We have got about 5-6 minutes. Thanks for joining me on a little journey. Yeah, Lauren.
I'm not sure that I wouldn't have chosen Noah because Noah didn't really challenge God, and when this whole situation occurred, I think he really struggled with his own belief. Um, and I was trying to think about, and I'm sure there's so many examples of people that command hope within our story. I think Moses was one of them. Moses was an individual that struggled with so much and kept that ship afloat so that we eventually emerge from a conundrum that we didn't understand and we didn't know what to expect. But he was a man of the story of who Moses was a man of great, I think, optimism in many ways, at least for me. Last week we discussed Yitro, who brought to Moses another dimension of hope, an understanding of how he may even be a better person. So I think your analogy about the open window is a good analogy. I'm just not sure I would attribute that whole analysis to Noah. So
I appreciate that. For me, the window and then the sending out of the dove and the waiting. And I think that faith, like, and that's why I appreciate Herman Cohen because he connects faith and hope very deeply. It's meant to be struggled with. And maybe that's one of the reasons why Noah speaks to me so much, is because I do think he struggles with it. He actually has to be instructed to open the door once the floodwaters have subsided. That there is a sense that like he has this hope, but he also needs a little push to open the door and to get out and to build the new thing. And that speaks to me because I think that Moses in some ways is a little bit more unreachable for me, right? Because he's Moses. Noah feels like somebody I can access a little bit more. So, but thank you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, Carol, Karen, and then Carol.
A couple of things. One, if you look at the two sort of opposite concepts of hope and despair, they're both very contagious. And you're talking about being, looking beyond ourselves. So that if we are not alone and we are sharing our hope, that could be contagious in a good way. If we are sharing our despair, that can be contagious in a not so good way. And I think, it's a time when we both have to look for leaders who embrace hope, and also to kind of integrate that kind of culture of hope within ourselves. And the other thing that just came to my mind when you were talking about something bigger than ourselves is the words of Hillel, "Im ani li," if I'm not for myself, who will be for me, and so on. So I think there's a long tradition of looking beyond ourselves. And if you look at a man like Noah, he was, with the exception of his wife and sons, he was pretty alone.
Yeah.
So to be able to, to kind of look beyond that, I think was monumental.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate like what in these moments where I think we're sort of, the Jewish people are also in a moment that feels a little bit alone, what it is like to force ourselves to still look beyond. Maybe we're looking towards other Jews in other Jewish communities, or we're sort of trying to remind ourselves that we're part of this something bigger, even if we don't know what it is. Right, that there has to be that embrace of the unknown as part of hope. Yeah, Carol.
The one comment you made that really stuck in my mind and will for a long time is that optimists and pessimists both excuse themselves from acting. I have never heard that expressed before. And I don't generally go to the religious themes, as Micah knows. I pick odd things to pick on. I've always had the mistaken opinion that optimists just got on with it and did what they had to do. I have a tendency to be a bit on the pessimistic side. So I found this a very reassuring concept for some reason or other, and I want to thank you for it because I'm going to use it on me.
I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Thanks. Yeah, Micah, you get the last word.
Oh boy, that's a lot of pressure. Following up a little bit on what Carol just said, the notion, I'm not sure I totally agree with that definition of optimist, but that doesn't really matter because I think the point here is the activeness of hope. And that I'm so glad you brought it back around to Herman Cohen, not only because he's one of my favorite thinkers, but also because I was thinking about how messianic this idea is, that and Jewish messianism is the belief that the world will be better, and also that you have to get involved in doing that, right? And that's what Cohen teaches. But before him, it's what the Kabbalists teach when they talk about returning the sparks back to God and repair, tikkun olam, like this, that Judaism is so much built on this idea that hope comes along with a commitment to repair. So it seems to me that maybe the first step is to believe that it can be better. And so I guess maybe that's what building the window is, right? First step is to believe that it can be better. And then the next step is actually to take steps toward it. But you have to start by believing it can be better, because if you don't believe it can be better, then there's no point in ever taking any steps. So I found this really fascinating and a fruitful discussion. And I want to thank you for teaching us today.
My pleasure. I'll take the last word because what you said made me think of a beautiful text that didn't make it onto the sheet, but I think about all the time. In that era of Messianism, there's a text of Rabbi Natan that if a kid comes running up to you and says the Messiah is here, the Messiah is here, and you have a sapling in your hand, you plant the tree. Right? And that's the action, like that's the practice of hope, is even if you think that your hope has been realized, you actually do the action of repair before you run and greet the Messiah. Right? And that's like that teaches us more about Judaism's relationship to hope than any idea of the Messiah. It's how you should act in the world in the knowledge of a better future, is that you have to build and build as if you are the one in charge of building that better future, of building that window. So thanks for inviting me. A pleasure to learn with all of you. And yes, I can send the source sheet in the chat now. There's one tiny transcription error in the Herman Cohen, I think, where it says longer, but it should say no longer. So if you're downloading it now before it's corrected, just know that in my typing, I did not add that word in.
Thank you to Rabbi Stephanie Crawley. This was a really wonderful discussion and some wonderful texts. Next week, we are learning with Rabbi Audrey Karotkin, who will be talking about hope in the Talmud, hope in rabbinic texts. So I invite you to join us again next week. And thanks again to Rabbi Crawley. And take care, everyone. Have a good week.